Hey, welcome back to the shop. So last time we talked a little bit about cutting the binding and purfling channels, and for this video I thought I would talk a little bit about gluing the binding and purfling into those channels using hot hide glue. And I know a lot of people think hot hide glue is a really short open time. How do you possibly do that? Why not use EVA glues, modern woodworking glues? It's a real challenge to get all the way around, the top or the back when you're binding the guitar with the PVA glue. And I think the glue we were using at a 5-minute open time, you could get Type Bond Ultimate that has like a 10-minute open time. But doing multiple lines of purfling where you have to get the glue in between and doing that all in 10 minutes between the point of the final wrap and the first swipe of glue is exceedingly challenging. I don't think I ever actually did it with PVA glue. I don't think I actually ever witnessed anyone in school do it with PVA glue. It's just a lot to do in 10 minutes. And I think when you think about it that way, you're never going to get it done in 60 seconds, obviously. Why not use liquid hide glue? And I would say that I very much avoid liquid hide glue. I don't think it really ever plays a role in guitar building for me personally. I might occasionally need it in the shop for some other task or find it convenient to have. So I have a pound of urea I bought at an art store, and I will mix it up fresh when I need it, and that's pretty much the only way that I find that I will use liquid hide glue. Guitar work, I just generally don't use it. I don't think it's really important. But then how do you work around the 1 minute open time that people often talk about in terms of hide glue? But there's a major flaw in that thinking, and that is that the thought that hide glue is somehow just an old-fashioned PVA glue that's more irritating because you have to mix it up and then heat it before you use it. And it can be used in a similar way to PVA glue, of just slapping it on a joint and clamping it together and letting it dry, and it works great for those applications. But I think for larger glue ups, I often tend to think of it more as like a wood solder. It's always going to be reactivatable with heat and moisture. It's a great deal more difficult to do that when you have a dry joint that's been around for a while. You think about doing repairs on a guitar that's been glued with hide glue, you're basically applying heat and moisture to reactivate that glue line, and then you can slice through the glue line to separate the parts. But it takes a long time to get enough heat and moisture into the joint to actually reactivate the glue. But on a fresh application where the moisture hasn't been evaporated by the air or wicked away by the wood, it's really easy to get the glue to reactivate. And so we're going to use that property to pretty casually put these bindings in, glue them up, tape them, wrap them, and then activate the glue and achieve a pretty solid glue joint for these bindings and purflings. So let's see how that's done. So I already bent the binding, and I did a fitting while I was bending it for the binding. I'll bend a side and I'll cut the joints, and then I'll bend the second side and I'll cut it all to fit and tape it up and let it sit for a day. It's normally how I do it. So that's all ready. I didn't film the bending part because if you made it to this point, you've obviously got bent sides. Somehow you bent them or they came bent. But I think at this point, doing a bending tutorial with the sides makes more sense than trying to do it with the binding, so I'll probably leave that for a future thing. But working from this point where everything's fit, I fit it in a very specific way, especially for the back, where I'm going to have two binding and purfling joints, and that is so that I can, when I start on this, I can tape, untape one of the joints. I normally start at the heel of the guitar, and when I start gluing, I'm going to start here. I have what I call a slip side and a lock side, and the joints are set so that on this side I can glue it down first. I can get glue in here for a couple inches, tape it down up to the binding. The purfling will extend a little beyond that, and then I can glue a couple inches on this side, and these will just sit nicely, holding those joints together. On the binding, it's like a 45 in this direction. On the purfling, I cut ramps into the slip side, and the lock side is the reverse of that, so that they just lock over it. So I will glue this side and then this side and have them taped down securely. And then I will begin by untaping all of this side, which is the side that has a slip joint, all the way back, and probably a couple inches, few inches of this side of the binding and purfling, leaving all of this tape on. And then I will work my way around the guitar in this direction. I apply the glue with just a brass feeler gauge. It's taped securely onto a cut-off piece of lining. I use the brass instead of steel because I used to use steel, but there's something about the rust that can cause it to bleed. I didn't have a problem for a long time, and then I had an Engelmann spruce top that I did the purfling channels with like a steel feeler gauge, and I ended up with blue sort of, I don't know, bleed over into the top all along various points of the boundary between the purfling and the top, and it was, you know, inside the wood, so you couldn't just sand it off to get rid of the blemish. So I bought some brass feeler gauges. I always tape them up with the little hole that the screw goes through in the feeler gauge pouch, so that I feel like you dip it in the glue and you end up with more glue on the whole side than if you flip it around to the other side. So yeah, I will work around using this to get glue in between the bits of binding, and also into the channels themselves, and I can kind of press everything as I go to spread glue around. I normally only do a couple inches at a time, and I use the glue very liberally. If I get any onto the surfaces of the top or back or running down the sides, I'll just wipe it off with my fingers. If you leave it, it'll interfere with the tape, and you want that tape to be really secure. And also, if you left a bunch of glue, it would eventually find its way into your binding tape, and that would be a mess. So I work quickly, but not super hurriedly, because again, I'm not as worried about time using this method as I would be in other circumstances. I don't want to take a lot of time doing it, but it's not a super huge rush to get it done in 10 minutes or anything. I'll work my way around, so I can glue all the way to where the joint fits together right here. For the binding, the purfling joints are going to extend past, and I'm going to leave that. I'm going to untape all of this, which hasn't been glued yet, back to this point where we had glued up at the beginning and taped down. I'm obviously going to leave that down still, and then I'm going to work glue and tape all the way back around to here, where then I can simply fit the joints for the purfling and for the binding over the already glued down jointed pieces. The same as up here, have them glued in, and then we're ready to start wrapping. For that, I have about 100 feet of cloth tape. I bought it at a fabric store for like 20 bucks. They didn't have 100 feet lengths, so I got 3 lengths, and I spent a couple minutes sewing them together. Wrap them up on a dowel. I'll generally soak them down with water before I do this. That'll be what I do as soon as this video is over. I like the cloth tape. It has a little bit of give. If you soak it down, it seems like it has a little bit more give, and I think that give is helpful in building tension as you wrap it around. I also, maybe this shrinks a little bit as it dries, and maybe that helps the joint. I don't know. I used Kevlar tape once for this operation and for other operations as well, but I don't like how, since it's super strong, you can't stretch it at all. I'm just not strong enough to build any tension into it, So while you're wrapping it around, unless you can hold like the full tension that you initially put in, when you go to wrap it again, you're going to lose it. And I just noticed that it seemed noticeably looser, and like it was exerting much less force onto the bindings, because probably of the limitation of being a human being trying to wrap it. And it also, because it's such strong stuff, if you do happen to get it really tight, you can definitely damage binding. I've definitely put little funny dents into ebony fretboards that I used it to put a fretboard back on a guitar once. So this cheap cotton tape is definitely the best thing I've tried. I will start wrapping from the waist, a couple times around the waist. I want to work outward from the waist at this point. So it'll be a couple times around the waist, and then wrapping it around the lower bout until I get back to the waist and I've got this section done. These portions are not going to get done until the end. And then I'll make a couple wraps around the waist, start on the upper bout, do the same thing, sort of working opposite sides around, come back to the waist, do a couple, or probably just do like one wrap around the waist, bring it to one of these sides and start wrapping the length of the guitar. I generally want to put a wrap directly over the joints at this point, so that I can exert as much force as I can to hold these joints together. And then when that's all wrapped up, we get to the point where we get to reactivate the glue and make this all a really solid joint. So you could just use a heat gun. I've done that in the past. It means having to work a little bit faster, because while you're gluing everything and wrapping it and all of that, the wood is wicking away moisture, and the air is, of course, moisture is evaporating into the air from the glue joint, and it's just slowly drying out. And the heat gun is going to be a dry heat, so it's going to dry it out faster. So you want to work a little bit faster so that you can have more moisture still in the glue. But it's definitely doable, it works well. And you just work from the waist out, around the bout to the joint, around the bout to the joint, flip it over, around the bout to the joint, around the bout to the joint. You don't want to get the glue too hot though, and that can be a difficulty. If you have the heat gun on a low setting, it takes a long time to heat the binding and the purfling up to the point where it will reactivate the glue, which just means it's drying out more and it'll take you longer to get around. If you turn the heat up, it'll do it faster, but you have to turn the heat up on the heat gun a lot, and then you don't want to cook the glue. So I've started actually using a pressure cooker that I had for doing repair work, and I've just got like a 2-foot length of PVC hose that I bought at a brew store. It's attached to the steam valve, and so you get it boiling and turn the heat down a little bit, and it just shoots steam out of the hose. And that steam, of course, is temperature regulated by the boiling point of wherever you live, so 212 here and lower if you're at higher elevation. Certainly well beyond the heat that we need to reactivate this glue. The steam is a much better carrier of heat than the air from the heat gun, so it works faster. And since your biggest problem here is having enough moisture that the glue will continue to activate in the way you want it to, a little bit of extra moisture from the steam is really helpful, I find. It doesn't take very long. You can feel it as you go, steam for a few seconds, and then you can feel the heat when you touch it. You'll also be able to see glue bubbling out in places where you have like a little gap that you missed during the taping. And it's just like the heat gun, you work around from the waist to the joint, on both sides. Again, you don't want it to get the glue super hot. The the steam is of course hotter than you want it to, but the wood will, you know, soak up some of that heat. But you don't need to sit on an area for super long. And generally, I try and keep it moving slowly throughout the whole process. You could stop there. I have a heat gun, and so I generally will just go around really quick with the heat gun, not trying to heat the binding at all, but just drying things out a little bit. Just a couple minutes around the whole guitar, just drying things out. You don't really need to do that, but it doesn't really take any time, so I do it. And then it's just a matter of waiting about a day for everything to dry, and then you can unwrap it and untape it, and then you have to clean it all up. So I'm going to go ahead and get this glued, and then tomorrow I'm going to hopefully be cleaning both sides of this up. So thanks for watching today. I'm going to have a little time lapse hopefully of this process as I do this back, but this is probably the last point in this video that I'm going to be talking. So thanks for joining me today. I hope to see you again next time at the next video that I make. As always, you can follow the link in the description below to my website to see a little bit more of my work, or if you're interested in learning more about building guitars, you can find out more information there. If you like the video, or if you're interested in learning to build guitars, please subscribe to my channel, and yeah, hope you're staying safe and healthy, and take care. I'll see you next time.